Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche issued an order late last night that terminated President Trump's $1.776 so-called anti-weaponization fund, which could have compensated January 6th insurrectionists, among other people. Blanche's order also clarifies that the president's settlement with the IRS for tax audit immunity for Trump and his family members only applies to claims open at the time of the settlement and doesn't protect the president or his family from future tax filings. Republican Senators John Cornyn of Texas and Thom Tillis of North Carolina have both demanded that Blanche put in writing that the anti-weaponization fund was not moving forward, as well as clarify that tax audit immunity before they would vote to advance his nomination for AG. That vote is set for tomorrow after being postponed last week because they hadn't figured out these very concerns. I want to bring in MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher. And Fallon, you and I thought that we would be doing more unpacking of why the administration wouldn't put this in writing when we know over at DOJ, lawyers love to put things in writing. It was the lack of clarity that was preventing them from moving forward. And yet, as I was reading this, it wasn't clear to me the way that they were handling the IRS tax audit piece. So if we could start there and break that down, because DOJ in this letter is pretty clear. The fund is dead. We're good on that front. So talk about both pieces of this and why, at least to my reading, the IRS thing felt a little bit nebulous.
Yeah, Allie, they definitely wove that in there kind of at the end, almost like a footnote, to the fact that I actually had to read it through a few times to make sure that I was actually reading it correctly. Granted, this was at 3:30 this morning before I actually had my coffee. But what I want to be clear about is that as far as the immunity agreement goes, I would say that it seems to clarify it rather than limit it. So that could create some problems because we know that both Cornyn and Tillis wanted that agreement to be limited. What it does is it lays out what we already knew, that this was retroactive only. It's not forward looking. But then what it does a little bit differently here is that it clarifies that it only affects the plaintiffs. Now, if you go back to the initial May 19th order that established the immunity deal, it says the plaintiffs, but then there are all these like related parties. There's trusts, associated individuals, all these things. So there's an argument that he is limiting. But what could create a problem here is that this order about the immunity deal isn't signed. You'll see there were two documents that he posted online overnight. The first one is a formal order rescinding the fund. He signs that. The second one it's more of a press release, it almost reads like. It says that it's an announcement about it. And so he doesn't sign that. That could create some problems down the road. But my read is that he appears to be clarifying, maybe limiting, but officially clarifying what already exists.
Yeah, and I think the ultimate question is the fund was just one piece of it, and certainly that's one of the things that Tillis and Cornyn together were focused on. But when I spoke with John Cornyn last week, he was really focused on the IRS immunity piece of it, in large part because he felt like it was the DOJ making a deal with someone who happens to be the president of the United States in a way that they would not make that same deal of future immunity in perpetuity for you and your family around the IRS and future audits. He felt that that was unfair. And I think now we're at the point of questioning, does this deal that is made right now actually serve as a deal that moves this nomination over the finish line? We haven't heard from Tillis. I saw a colleague of mine in the Hill press corps with a statement from a Cornyn spokesperson saying that they've reached an agreement and that they're going to be waiting to see what it is. Obviously, we got it late last night. So does this clear the runway now?
I mean, Allie, in theory, it should. I would have to believe that Blanche would not put out anything publicly like this if they didn't already have an agreement that they were going to move forward and actually confirm him. But there are still a number of outstanding questions here. If we go back just briefly to the actual part of the fund deal itself, that rescission, that's something that judges have been asking them to do since June, and they have not done it. But when I'm reading that text, what's notable is, of course, he signs it. He says they're not moving forward with it. He's been saying that for a while. This is a signed order that formally rescinds the fund. But my question is this forever? Is this just for now? Because it doesn't specify that. So while they're backing off of this fund right now, there is nothing, as far as I can tell, in this order that says that they can't revive this in the future. And so when we're thinking about his confirmation, I'm also thinking about the outstanding legal challenges. There are multiple cases that are still challenging this fund. I don't know if this is going to be enough to moot those cases because it's not permanent forever. This is saying we're not moving forward with it now. So I would imagine, as far as the Senate side goes, I don't have the reporting on this, but I would have to imagine that there's no way that Blanche would put this out publicly without the president's sign off, without those senators sign off, with some sort of agreement that this will actually get his confirmation. Because, of course, he could have stayed on in an acting capacity for chunks of 210 days, depending on how they played this game. But this is a president who, you have to remember, brought this IRS lawsuit to secure the settlement agreement because he wanted some sort of judicial legitimacy around there. This is a president who cares about legitimacy with things like this. You would have to imagine that he wants an officially Senate-confirmed attorney general.
Yeah, you would imagine that. And then also he has said during his first term that he doesn't mind people being acting because it does give him more leverage over them. And I just want to, when you talk about the lawsuits that were filed over that $1.776 billion fund, Blanche in the signed document that you're referencing says there have been several frivolous lawsuits filed challenging the fund, and at least one declines to say that this is moot. So he's trying to dead that issue. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch now once the sun comes up, or maybe we should just check Truth Social at the commercial break, what the president himself, who has really kept the idea of this fund alive, including in that clip we showed at the top of the show, he has really been the driver behind it. Blanche tried to dead this at multiple points, and Trump kept saying, well, this is popular for people in Trump world. So we're going to see what happens as it gets slightly later in the day. But I think your analysis of this is probably right. If I put my Capitol Hill correspondent hat on, it seems like the exact kind of thing that Tillis and Cornyn were saying they needed as we went into the weekend. So I'll be watching very closely for how they themselves react. And the Senate comes back to town, in theory, to handle this business tomorrow. There is a lot, though, going on your beat. So I want to talk about this stunning reversal that happened over the weekend as well. The DOJ announced it's dropping felony charges against a former Olympian after acknowledging that damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool was caused by flawed installation, not vandalism, like they've been saying, with no proof. The motion to dismiss was filed by D.C. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro on Friday after prosecutors concluded the damage attributed to former Olympian David Hearn stemmed from defects in the installation of the reflecting pool's liner. The filing stated that information obtained after the indictment showed the damage was caused by, quote, botched work performed by the project's contractor hired by the Trump administration. And it wasn't botched because of criminal conduct. The Trump administration has defended the $16 million no-bid contract by saying the work needed to get done by July 4th for the nation's 250th anniversary. Hearn had pleaded not guilty to a felony charge of destruction of property after authorities alleged he damaged the iconic reflecting pool during a June visit to the National Mall. In response, President Trump lashed out on social media, stating he disagreed, quote, 100% with Jeanine Pirro on the reflecting pool. I don't know what she was thinking. To me, it was a pure case of vandalism. Like, it's not vandalism if you can't prove it. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum echoed the president's message in a social media post of his own, writing, quote, the evidence is clear. Vandals have repeatedly caused damage to the reflecting pool. Neither Burgum nor Trump provided evidence for those claims. And ultimately, Fallon, isn't that it? That these guys can, in the court of public opinion, say whatever they want, but a DOJ lawyer or Jeanine Pirro can't go in and just lie in court.
Allie, we're hearing this directly from Jeanine Pirro's office herself, that there was no evidence here that Davy Hearn, that former Olympian, actually committed this damage on the reflecting pool. Now, what's really notable, there are a number of things here, is that we're hearing this after he's already been charged, after he entered his not guilty plea, and as this case was getting really close to trial. This trial was set to begin at the end of September. And so for Jeanine Pirro's office to move to dismiss this indictment, saying, hang on, we actually found out there is no evidence here. He didn't do this wrong. This is that no-bid contractor's fault, not the Olympian, and presumably not the other people who have been charged. Now, Davy Hearn's the only one who was facing a felony count, but multiple other people were charged with misdemeanor damage here. But I cannot underscore how significant this is, that the DOJ is backing off of one of these indictments that you could make the argument is one of these perceived political indictments that wouldn't necessarily have been brought by other administrations. Jeanine Pirro here is now paying the price for backing off of this indictment. This is like a massive, massive turnaround, and just something we don't see, because this is someone who's had no issue bringing cases that the president wants in the past. This is the same person who tried to indict the so-called seditious six, those members of Congress, and a number of cases like this. Allie?
Yeah, I mean, I was on a podcast with Harry Litman and a few other former DOJ types, and they were all saying that this case, before it was reversed, was so embarrassing for the DOJ here in D.C. And I wonder now, I'll probably call them after this, how they see this reversal. Because you're right, it's absolutely stunning. And for someone like Pirro, who has made her career off of sticking closely to Trump, interesting to see what this does to her star in Trump world. MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher getting a lot of news on the board all before sunrise. Thank you.